The sharp, synthetic chime of a dating app matching echoed through my own living room. It was a bright, aggressively cheerful sound that sliced right through the quiet hum of the refrigerator. The noise emanated from the smartphone of a man who had stopped being my fiancé 3 months prior, yet still firmly occupied the center cushion of my sofa. People often talk about karma, about taking the high road and letting the universe handle those who wrong you. They say the best revenge is living well. But when a parasitic squatter refuses to respect the sanctuary of your home, passive patience feels a lot like surrender. I preferred a more targeted approach. I didn't just want him off my furniture. I wanted to dismantle his ego entirely. And as that little synthetic chime rang out a second time, I realized that sometimes the most effective eviction notice is a wedding invitation featuring you and his supposed best friend. To understand the sheer audacity of the man occupying my couch, you have to rewind to late 2019. His name was Torin. My house smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner back then, a quiet haven I had scraped together every dime to afford. Torin arrived with a trunk full of wrinkled clothes, a gaming console, and a string of evictions he blamed entirely on a rotating cast of unreasonable landlords. I was young, exhausted, and severely compromised by the sunk cost fallacy of a rocky, long-term relationship. I genuinely believed that moving him into my stable environment would act as a catalyst. I thought proximity to responsibility might finally cure his chronic allergy to ambition. My daily reality was a relentless grind. I was a full-time university student, drowning in advanced seminar papers and heavily underlined textbooks. Beyond the academic weight, I was the sole caretaker for my mother, whose cognitive decline required a rigid schedule of medication management, meal preparation, and boundless patience. Add the dogs, the house upkeep, and the financial burden, and I was operating on a permanent deficit of sleep. Torin, meanwhile, worked a standard 40-hour week at a minimum-wage retail job. The moment he clocked out, his responsibilities terminated. He treated my home like an all-inclusive resort where the maid service was free and the fridge magically restocked itself. He contributed nothing, not to the mortgage, not to the chores, not to the heavy emotional lifting of keeping my mother comfortable. Yet, by early 2020, there was a ring on my finger. I had mistaken his willingness to occupy my space for a desire to commit to our future. The illusion shattered on Christmas Day. The air outside was bitter cold, the windows frosted over, but the chill inside my chest was absolute. I was looking for a recipe on his tablet when a message notification dropped down from the top of the screen. It wasn't a vague, suspicious text. It was a logistical complaint from a woman I had never met, arguing about why he couldn't move his things into her apartment yet. The confrontation that followed was devoid of screaming or thrown plates. It was entirely pathetic. Cornered by the glowing evidence of his own infidelity, Torin offered a defense so absurd it bordered on comedic. He claimed he had simply forgotten to tell me that he had been sleeping with someone else for months. He had already informed his entire social circle of his imminent departure, framing himself as the tragic victim of my demanding lifestyle. The only reason he was still sleeping in my bed was that his new partner, evidently possessing a shred of self-preservation, had refused to let him move in. With the relationship officially deceased, I assumed common decency would dictate a swift exit. I expected him to pack his duffel bags and vanish before the new year. Instead, January bled into February and February crawled into March. Torin's frantic search for a new residence materialized as him permanently indenting my couch cushions, eating my groceries, and complaining about the Wi-Fi speed. Any remaining affection I had for him calcified into pure, unadulterated disdain. He had transitioned from an unfaithful fiancé to an actively hostile squatter. Which brings us back to that Tuesday evening, the synthetic chime of the dating app, and the sheer volume of his disrespect. I stood in the doorway of the living room, a stack of freshly graded exams in my hand, watching him recline in his sweatpants. His thumb swiped right, left, right, the phone volume turned all the way up. "Turn that off," I said, my voice dangerously level. He didn't even look up from the screen. "It's a free country." "It's my living room," I corrected, stepping closer. "If you're going to sit on the furniture I paid for, under the roof I maintain, and look for your next victim, you can at least have the basic decency to do it in private or mute your phone." Torin finally lifted his eyes, an infuriating, entitled smirk playing on his lips. "Or what, you're going to kick me out? Good luck. I know my tenant rights." It was a brazen challenge, a calculated bet that I was too exhausted from managing my mother's care and my degree to navigate the legal labyrinth of a formal eviction. Anger, hot and bright, flashed behind my eyes. Keep swiping in my face, I warned, my tone dropping to a quiet, serrated edge, and I swear to God, Torin, I will sleep with your best man. He laughed, a short, dismissive scoff. Rourke, please, you don't even have his number. It was intended as an empty threat, a barb thrown in a moment of suffocating frustration. But as I walked back to my bedroom, the anger didn't dissipate. It crystallized. I am a woman who thrives on seeing goals through to their absolute completion. I don't leave papers half-written, I don't leave chores half-done, and I certainly don't leave bluffs uncalled. I sat on the edge of my bed, pulled out my phone, and opened my contacts. I actually did have Rourke's number, saved from a group chat organized months ago to coordinate a surprise birthday dinner for Torin, a dinner I had paid for. I stared at the name. Rourke was a quiet, imposing guy who worked in a specialized structural engineering firm. He had always been polite to me, though guarded. Torin constantly bragged about their unbreakable brotherhood. My fingers flew across the keyboard before I could talk myself out of it. Hi Rourke, Torin and I are done. He cheated and now he's squatting in my house refusing to leave. Do you have time for a drink this week? I need to vent and honestly I just want to annoy him. I tossed the phone onto the mattress, fully expecting to be ignored or blocked. 3 minutes later the screen lit up. I'm free Thursday at 7, the quiet pub on 4th Street. And for the record, I'm not his best friend. I barely tolerate the guy. Thursday evening brought a relentless, driving rain that turned the city streets into slick, mirrored surfaces. The pub was dimly lit, smelling of roasted barley, old wood, and wet wool. Rourke was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived, a dark stout in front of him. He stood up slightly as I approached, pulling out a chair for me. Up close, he was sharper than I remembered, shrewd dark eyes, the faint scent of cedar and rain, and a posture that commanded the space without trying. I ordered a gin and tonic and immediately laid my cards on the sticky wooden table. I told him about the infidelity, the squatter situation, the Tinder swiping, and the exact reason I had texted him. I expected him to be uncomfortable, perhaps defensive of his supposed friend. Instead, Rourke took a slow sip of his beer and let out a low, rumbling laugh. Torin has this remarkable delusion that everyone he meets is his best friend, he said, his voice a rich baritone. We worked together 5 years ago. He got fired for sleeping in the stockroom. He's been clinging to me ever since because I occasionally buy him a beer when he cries about his life. He asked me to be his best man, and I said yes solely because I felt sorry for you and wanted to make sure he actually showed up to the altar. The tension drained out of my shoulders, replaced by a sudden, buoyant relief. For the next 3 hours, we didn't just dissect Torin's catastrophic character flaws. We talked about my mother, about the heavy, invisible burden of caretaking. We talked about his engineering projects, the intricate logic of building things meant to last. Rourke was fiercely intelligent, possessed a dry, razor-sharp wit, and actually listened when I spoke. There was no competing for airtime, no veiled complaints about his own life. By the time he walked me to my car, shielding me from the rain with his umbrella, the spite that had fueled the evening was completely gone. In its place was a magnetic, undeniable pull. Let me know when you officially serve him the eviction papers, Rourke said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I'll come over and help carry his TV to the curb. The very next morning, I handed Torin a formal, legally binding 30-day eviction notice. When he saw Rourke's truck idle in my driveway a few weeks later to oversee the move-out, the look of profound betrayal on his face was a masterpiece I will cherish until my dying day. Rourke and I didn't rush. The foundation of our relationship was built on the ashes of my previous disaster, but we took the time to clear the debris. Over the next 2 years, he became the steady, unshakable pillar in my chaotic life. When my mother had a bad day, Rourke was there, sitting with her, patiently listening to stories she had told a dozen times. When I was drowning in final exams for my bachelor's degree, I would wake up to find fresh coffee brewing and my laptop fully charged. He didn't demand praise for basic acts of partnership. He simply showed up every single day. We were married on April 2nd. It was a crisp, sun-drenched afternoon. I walked down the aisle with my bachelor's degree already framed on my home office wall, halfway through a grueling master's program that Rourke had encouraged me to pursue. There were no extravagant displays of wealth, just a quiet, profound certainty. As he slid the gold band onto my finger, his grip was warm and calloused, grounding me completely in the present. The contrast between my reality and Torin's could not be more stark. News travels, even when you don't go looking for it. The last I heard through the grapevine, Torin's grand plans had entirely imploded. The woman he had cheated on me with finally saw through his weaponized incompetence and severed ties. Left with no fallback, he had moved into his father's basement, only to be kicked out 6 months later for refusing to pay a meager utility bill. He remained stagnant, drifting from one flimsy excuse to the next, a cautionary tale of what happens when you treat the people who support you as disposable resources. Sometimes, establishing a boundary isn't just about building a wall to keep the wrong people out. It's about clearing the space necessary for the right people to walk in. I could have spent years mourning the time I wasted on a man who viewed me as nothing more than a convenient utility. Instead, I channeled that frustration into action. I refused to be a passive participant in my own disrespect, and in doing so, I stumbled into the greatest partnership of my life. Never let anyone make you feel unreasonable for demanding basic respect in your own space. Protect your peace, enforce your standards, and remember that the best revenge isn't just living well. It's thriving with the very people your enemies took for granted. If you found value in this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your own experiences with setting boundaries in the comments below. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to life. Stay strong and never settle for a squatter in your heart or your home.